the African Transformation Movement, the president there, Vuyolwethu Zungula, has warned judges in the panel that the probe into the Phala Phala saga and that they themselves will be impeached if they try to protect the President Cyril Ramaphosa because of his powers that include appointing judges. Well, Zungula joining me now to give us more clarity on some of these utterances. Mr. Zungula, thank you very much for your time. Let's start with whether or not you have any knowledge at this stage as to whether or not the panel is on track to hand over the report to the Speaker tomorrow.
Morning, Polly. Firstly, I think there is a distortion and the context in which your opening statement, that is not how I've said those things. However, at this present moment, the rules of Parliament state that the panel tomorrow must issue the report to the Speaker, and we know that the political parties, they stuck to the deadlines, the President stuck to his deadline, so there's nothing that should stop the panel from reporting in accordance to the rules tomorrow.
All right, so let's deal with the distortion as regards the introduction I have just said. Let's then give you the platform. What is it that you have said exactly about this panel's report and whether or not they find that the President did something wrong or not?
Firstly, the context is that the President has got so much powers to appoint judges, powers to appoint heads of Chapter 9 institutions, police commissioners. Therefore, we must have the confidence as a country that is not entangled in any criminal network. That's the first point. The second point is that this independent panel has got vast information and evidence before them. And this information and evidence before them clearly points to violations of the Constitution. Section 96(2)A of the Constitution, which speaks to paid work, which the President has confirmed. Section 96(2)B of the Constitution, which speaks about the risk of a conflict of interest, of which that is blatantly there. Therefore, the report of the panel, if we as a party and other opposition parties are not satisfied with the report of the panel, will explore all avenues, including taking it on review. You'll recall that in the Nkandla report that was adopted by Parliament, political parties went to the courts as a part of having recourse on a report that they believed that that report was actually protecting the then president from accountability. Therefore, the same thing will happen now if the contents of the report do not have justice, if the contents of the report is basically a whitewash of clear transgressions to the law as committed by Mr. Ramaphosa.
Yeah. Mr. Zungula, there's clearly lots to chew on. Can I ask that you stay on while we take the headlines at the top of 10, because this conversation is by no means over. Are you able to stay with us till then?
Definitely.
We were still in conversation with the president of the African Transformation Movement, Vuyolwethu Zungula, and it's got to do with the imminent handing over of the Phala Phala report by the independent panel that was appointed by Parliament to probe the circumstances or the allegations that are contained around the Phala Phala farm robbery at President Cyril Ramaphosa's farm. Mr. Zungula, I hope you are still with us. So, let's go back to at least one of the many statements that you have made. Let's start with the judges. Are you saying that the judges' personal reputations will be on the line if they do not find guilt on the part of the president regarding what happened at his farm? Am I understanding you correctly?
The judge's reputation is on the line if they do not make a report that is in line with the law and the facts and the evidence that is there. The judges are supposed to read the law, examine the evidence in accordance to the law, and what the evidence is here, what the evidence that is here at the present moment is that, number one, Mr. Ramaphosa is engaged in paid work, even though the Constitution prohibits him to do so. Number two, Mr. Ramaphosa put himself in a risk of a conflict of interest situation when he instructed someone who is employed by the state to guard him to personally investigate a matter or a criminal matter on his private farm and report back to him. Those are the facts. Therefore, if the judges find a way to report something else outside of those facts, definitely their reputation will be on the line.
And why do you say that? Is your view that they will be attempting to protect the president?
It will be clear, because there is no way in which, with such something that is so the facts are laid bare, the evidence is laid bare, and someone would try to issue a report that is saying there is no conflict of interest. Mr. Ramaphosa did not put himself in a risk of a conflict of interest. He's not engaged in paid work, even though he says on his own mouth that he is engaged in paid work of selling livestock. Therefore, if the judges were to find something else outside of those facts, then definitely there's something wrong.
There are people who are going to say, Mr. Zungula, that this is part and parcel of the attack on the judiciary, because these are independent people who have nothing to gain, perhaps I should put it, by ruling either or. Theirs is to simply peruse what is in front of them, and based on that, they will find guilt or innocence.
Look, what the independent panel is supposed to do, they are not there to say Mr. Ramaphosa is innocent or guilty. Their duty is to examine the evidence based on the motion and based on what the Constitution is saying. And then they must say there is prima facie evidence that Parliament, it will be worth it for Parliament to look into these transgressions to the law. Therefore, they are not going to say Mr. Ramaphosa must be impeached or he must not be impeached. They are only there to find prima facie evidence that we have submitted. And lastly, the state of our country is divided between the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. So each and every people, all people that are part of these institutions must be held accountable. So it can't be that when people are holding the executive accountable, people are saying it's an attack. When people are holding us as MPs accountable, it's an attack. It's not an attack. The same thing must happen to the judiciary. If the judiciary makes judgments that are contrary to the law, the people have got a right and a responsibility of holding them accountable on those judgments. They are not above the law. They are not gods. They must be held accountable on the judgments that they ought to make, which are supposed to be in line with the prescripts of the law.
Let's deal with the report that they will ultimately hand over. That report, Mr. Zungula, is that not what you should concern yourself about? And that is that if the report says there is no prima facie evidence against the president, in other words, he has nothing to answer for, then you say this report, there is something wrong with it based on what you are saying is a clear guilty find on the part of the president. And add to that question whether or not you have sought advice as to whether or not that report is reviewable.
Firstly, we also need to look at the process. You'll recall that part of the process was to appoint an independent panel, which other parties were unhappy about the inclusion of a person who would be found or who was presumed to be not going to be independent because he's made certain public statements in favor of the president. Therefore, the report cannot be looked at in isolation. Also, the process must be looked as well. Therefore, if the judges or if the independent panel makes a report that is somewhat, which makes a mockery of this process, firstly, that report must be reviewed. Because there's no way in which you are going to allow the independent panel to protect the president there. The second issue is that the reputation of that independent panel also is on the line, which also means that if they were to be engaged in something that is unlawful, that is irrational, that is making a mockery of our justice system, then something must happen to them. They must also be personally held accountable for their actions.
Let's talk concrete steps now. If the report comes back and says there is prima facie evidence, that means that Parliament could potentially start a motion of no confidence against the President. Do you have the numbers? Are you confident of the numbers that will see to it that the President is indeed found to be unfit to hold office?
When the report comes tomorrow, it will definitely say there is prima facie evidence. From there, the next process in accordance to the rules of Parliament, that report must be debated and voted for in terms of the National Assembly. If the National Assembly votes for the report that there must be an impeachment inquiry, then that process will continue. However, what we are going to do as the ATM, it is to go back to that forum of opposition parties to say, here is a report that is saying that a president has got an impeachable case to answer. We cannot allow that president to sit in office whilst he has got an impeachable case to answer. The first thing that must happen urgently is a motion of no confidence, so that you do not have a president that is in power and that can use that power to actually influence the processes of investigation from the Chapter 9 institutions, from the Hawks, as well as the process in Parliament, firstly. The second issue is that the people elected MPs to represent them. Therefore, there is an opposition forum, including all members of the ANC, would not want South Africa to collapse and be destroyed because they are trying to protect a president that has got an impeachable case to answer. So definitely, yes, we do in Parliament have more than 200 members of Parliament that will vote to remove a president that has got an impeachable case to answer.
It is exactly that forum I'm interested to know, Mr. Zungula, as to whether or not your motion will enjoy the support of, in particular, a party like the Democratic Alliance, which is the second biggest.
There is no way any party in Parliament would support a president that has got an impeachable case to answer. That party cannot, there's no party that can stand and be anti-corruption, pro-good governance, holding of the executive accountable for abuses of power on one side, and on the other side, vote to protect a president that indeed is found to have violated the Constitution. It makes no sense. I can assure you now, there is no party that is going to do that.
Final question. If the report goes against your wishes, there is no prima facie evidence. In other words, is it safe to assume that you are going to go straight to court?
Definitely. We are going to sit down, explore all legal avenues, including going to court.
Vuyolwethu Zungula is the president of the African Transformation Movement. Thank you very much for your time, sir.